Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Krap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're going to be discussing the Eightfold Path, the mental discipline section of this particular teaching. This is a core central teaching that you would need to know inside and out, backwards and forwards, left, right, up, down, in order to make your way towards enlightenment. So in the last couple of weeks, I've been sharing a detailed understanding of the Eightfold Path. And I've broken this up into the three sections of the Eightfold Path, which is wisdom, moral conduct, and mental discipline. So in the last two classes, we discussed the wisdom section and the moral conduct section. In this class, we're going to be discussing the mental discipline section. And just like always, I'm going to be using the original words of the Buddha to help you guys see what he actually taught. And then I'm going to be teaching it to you in a way that you can understand it, you can reflect on it to independently verify it, and then you can practice it, integrating it into your life, and that's where you're really going to see the real benefits and the improvement as you're transitioning your mind. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly, and at the same time invite you to join for our meditation, because we start each class with a meditation. I'm going to start by chanting to ease us into the meditation. There's going to be some guidance, then there's going to be a period of time where it's just quiet, and then we're going to come out of the meditation with some more chanting. And then that's where I'll start our topic today, helping you to understand the mental discipline section of the Eightfold Path. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakawa Bhutang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakawa Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakatoro Kawito Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa มานุสรังโพโตภาควาติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect. Just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in naturally through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหะกวาพุทธังมะคะวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสคาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly ease your way out of meditation. Once again, I'd like to welcome all of you guys to our class today. It's nice to see all of you, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Welcome to our class today. As I mentioned, we're going to be studying the mental discipline section of the Eightfold Path. This is part 3 of a 3-part series that I've been doing in order to help you guys to understand this important teaching. This Eightfold Path is the core central teaching that you're going to need to know and understand and train your mind in order to be able to get to this enlightened mental state, where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, no longer experiencing any of those discontent feelings. So it's the Eightfold Path that you're learning and growing and developing in order to be able to train the mind and eradicate certain pollutions so that you can then experience the peace and the joy that is the enlightened mental state. Next week in our class, I'm going to be teaching the 4 stages of enlightenment and the 10 fetters. This is where we're going to go into detail about those 10 pollutions that the Buddha discovered. But it's the Eightfold Path that is guiding you and how to actually eliminate these from the mind. The Eightfold Path is a complete, perfect plan of exactly how to eradicate these from the mind. And you would need to know this inside and out, backwards and forwards, to be able to really make your way to enlightenment. One of the ways to think about the Eightfold Path is just like if you had a speaker system that you were trying to get a better and better quality sound out of these speakers, and you would kind of tweak these 8 dials in order to get a better and better quality sound. It's the same thing with your mind, that the Buddha gives these 8 individual steps that if you dial these into your life and you kind of tweak these, you'll be able to experience a better and better performing mind. You can actually evolve into this better human being being where you no longer experience any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All these and others are completely eliminated from the mind. You'll notice that there's focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory in the mind. You'll notice that you'll have personal and professional relationships that are blossoming and really growing, and they're at ease. You're not argumentative and bitter and hostile in these relationships any longer. You've eradicated the causes and conditions that are producing that unskillful conduct to the point where you're not even experiencing a bad mood anymore. An enlightened being doesn't even experience a bad mood because the causes and conditions that are producing it have been uprooted. And this Eightfold Path is what's going to help you to do that. So far in our last two classes, I've taught you the wisdom section and the moral conduct section. The wisdom section is something that is like a real foundation, and then you're building on top of that the moral conduct. And today we're going to go into the mental discipline. If you haven't learned the wisdom section and moral conduct section, that's been recorded on our YouTube channel, on our podcast, and Facebook. I've got books and audiobooks that teach this. You can go back and learn this because it's very important to be able to put together all the different factors, because right view and right intention are teaching you very important things that form a real foundation of wisdom, that without those, you wouldn't understand why you need to improve your moral conduct, because there's certain harm that you might be doing now through your moral conduct. You might think that you're doing all the best things in the world, but if you haven't studied the moral conduct from the Eightfold Path, you're not necessarily practicing right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And as long as you're putting out harmful moral conduct, this harm is going to come back to you. It's kind of like a broken pipe. It's spewing water, or it's spewing oil all over the place, and now it's making this entire mess. And if you just go try to clean up the mess and you haven't shut down the pipe, then you're going to keep spewing all this oil and water all over the place, and you're going to keep experiencing these unwholesome results. So the Buddha gives you this wisdom in which to build the moral conduct section so that you can shut down any harmful decisions you're making around your speech, actions, and livelihood. But you wouldn't really be able to put the moral conduct into place if you didn't have this mental discipline that I'm going to teach you today. Because you've learned things like about right speech, where you're eliminating things like harsh speech, right? This is the way you speak in terms of your tone, tempo, and word choice. Because when you're harsh and you're bitter and you're hostile, there's some craving, desire, attachment in the mind. The mind's longing, yearning, and wanting things to be a certain way. And that's why your speech is becoming unskillful and you're experiencing the harsh speech. So it's the mental discipline that's going to help you to eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments, so that now your moral conduct can be more in line with wise and skillful decisions that you make in the way that you interact in your relationships. So you're going to need to know the wisdom and moral conduct section, but it's ultimately the mental discipline section that allows you to really bring the moral conduct into practice. So it's not like you're mastering one step before you move to the next. You're actually learning all 8, and you're dialing all 8 in at the same time, and you're tweaking this mind more and more and more. And you're going to need to eventually get to the point where you've internalized the Eightfold Path so well that you could basically say it with ease, that you could basically recite each one of these steps and you know exactly what they are. Like, for example, right intention, you're going to need to know that that's the intention of renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness, and then know what those things are. You're going to need to know right speech is to eliminate lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. But in more detail, it's the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, which is speaking at the proper time, what you say is true, speaking gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness. And you should be able to go through each one of these factors and be able to know that. So you can take some time to really internalize this. And sometimes students like to spend some time with me, either through Zoom on a one-on-one discussion or maybe in person after they've studied it really closely. And then they kind of say it to me as if they're teaching me. And then I can help them to be able to see where they're not understanding certain components of the Eightfold Path. Because in order to really get the benefits of this practice of the Eightfold Path, you need to integrate it into your day-to-day life. And in order to do that, you're going to need to have it internalized in the mind. So you're going to need to do a certain amount of intellectual learning and investigation and examination. You're going to need to reflect, independently verify that these steps are actually true. And then you're going to need to practice. And in order to practice it on a day-to-day basis, you're going to need to internalize it within the mind. So now we're going to move into right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, helping you to understand what this is. And just like always, we're going to be using the original words of the Buddha, where I'm going to be reading those to you, and then I'm going to teach it to you in a way that you can integrate it into your life. The Buddha speaks very clear and very concise and very precise, but if you don't understand some of his other teachings, sometimes it can be challenging. Or if you haven't studied his teachings, you might not understand the way that he speaks and the way that he talks and what he's actually teaching to or what he's actually pointing to as part of his teachings. So I'm going to read these for you, and then I'm going to explain to you what these are and how to integrate them into your life. So here's right effort and what the Buddha is sharing on this. He says, "In what, monks, is right effort? Here, monks, a monk rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to prevent the arising of unarisen, evil, unwholesome mental states. He rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to overcome evil, unwholesome mental states that have arisen. He rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to produce unarisen, wholesome mental states. He rouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to maintain wholesome mental states that have arisen, not to let them fade away, to bring them to greater growth, to the full perfection of development. This is called right effort." So the Buddha is talking about 4 things here. 4 things that you need to strive for, 4 things that you need to apply in your day-to-day life, that you need to have effort and energy behind. That you're not going to just get to enlightenment. You're not going to just stumble into it. You got to put some effort into it. And here's what he's talking about is these 4 things, is to prevent unwholesome mental states that have not arisen from arising in the mind, to abandon unwholesome mental states that have arisen in the mind, produce unarisen wholesome mental states to arise in the mind, and maintain wholesome mental states that have arisen, not allowing them to fade away, and work to increase their growth in the mind. So I'm going to walk you through each one of these and give you examples of how you would apply this in your day-to-day life. What preventing unwholesome mental states that have not arisen from arising in the mind is that there's certain unwholesome qualities that are not currently in your mind. They're far, far, far from your mind. And what the Buddha is saying is you need to apply the effort to ensure that you prevent those from ever coming into the mind. A good example of that might be killing a human being. You may not have that anywhere even remotely close to your mind. You're not even thinking about it. You're not aspiring to do that. You don't want to kill anybody. It's really far from your mind. And what the Buddha is saying is prevent this kind of thing and others that are not currently in your mind from ever coming into the mind. Because if something like this came into your mind and you actually acted upon it, you would actually produce all kinds of harm, and that harm is going to come back to you. So any kind of unwholesome mental states, and you're going to be learning about these unwholesome mental states in your journey, you need to prevent them from ever coming into the mind, because those things may not actually be in your mind, so you're going to need to prevent them from ever coming into the mind. But then the second one is abandon unwholesome mental states that have arisen in the mind. Because there are certain unwholesome mental states that are currently in your mind. And if you ever notice those, which we're going to be talking about how you do that, is how you notice those unwholesome mental states, is you would like to eliminate them out of the mind. And you're going to need to apply the effort to do this. Just like the first one, you're going to need to apply the effort to prevent unwholesome mental states from arising in the mind. And here you're going to need to apply the effort to abandon any unwholesome mental states that are currently in the mind. Some examples might be if you're in an existing relationship and you have a craving for sexual contact outside of your current relationship, and you notice that coming up in your mind, you're going to need to apply the effort to abandon that. Because if you go outside your relationship and start having sex, this is going to cause all kinds of difficulties and problems in your life. You can easily get sexually transmitted diseases. People have been beat up and even murdered for going outside their relationships. You might have your material possessions destroyed. You could have your reputation damaged as you do this. So you wouldn't be interested in acting upon that. So you would like to cut that off and eliminate it, applying right effort to abandon that unwholesome mental state that has arisen in the mind. Or say you notice anger or frustration or irritation or any of these other things, like even jealousy or annoyment or dislike or any of these things. Because when these feelings are coming up, They're being produced by your own mind due to your cravings, desires, attachments. And what you would like to do is you would like to cut those off and let them go. You would like to abandon those unwholesome qualities. Because if you allow your mind to stay wired this way, where you're continuing to experience these feelings, then it's just going to keep going on and on and on. By the time you get to enlightenment, you don't even have the slightest dislike towards another being. The only reason why the mind has dislike towards others is because there's some expectation that the mind has, and this person isn't fulfilling it. So you might notice this anger, annoyment, or frustration arising based in your own cravings, desires, attachments. And when you notice any of those discontent feelings, you would like to abandon them. Even the pleasant feelings, the conditional happiness, which you guys should know about what that is now, and if you don't, you can let me know that those temporary pleasant feelings, they need to be abandoned as well in order to get to the permanent happiness or the permanent joy. So anytime you see discontentedness arising, you would like to apply the effort to cut that off and let it go. Then the third one that he's talking about here under right effort is produce unarisen wholesome mental states to arise in the mind. There are certain wholesome mental states that you're going to learn about on this path that may not currently be in your mind right now. And you're going to need to apply the effort to bring those into the mind. An example might be generosity. You're going to learn about how generosity trains your mind to let go. It's another training to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, where the mind's holding on, wanting things to be a certain way. So you're going to need to practice generosity with the people around you. You're going to need to do that from the middle way, but nonetheless, you're going to need to practice a certain amount of generosity. And if you find that it's very hard for you to share, and maybe you hold on to things really tight, maybe you're a little bit selfish, then you're going to need to apply the effort to bring this generosity into the mind. Or maybe you notice that you're not compassionate. Maybe you're lacking compassion. Where if you're lacking compassion, what you're going to notice is that the mind is indifferent and you could care less about other people's suffering and misfortunes. Or you might notice that you're on the other side of this, where you have worry and anxiety about every little thing that's going on in the world. Because what compassion is the middle way, where you have concern for the misfortune of others. It doesn't mean you act upon that, but you have the mental state of concern for the misfortune of others. Where if you're having anxiety and worry, that means that you're having craving, desire, attachment. There's something your mind's longing, yearning for. You might think it's care and compassion, but it's not the care and compassion that's producing that worry and anxiety. That's the craving, desire, attachment, the longing, the yearning. Or you might be all the way on the other side, where you're indifferent and you could care less about what happens to other people. And if you're in any of those categories, you're going to need to apply the effort to bring in the compassion, where you have this concern for the misfortune of others. That's applying right effort to produce unarisen, wholesome mental states to arise in the mind. And then the fourth one is maintain wholesome mental states that have arisen, not allowing them to fade away, and work to increase their growth in the mind. There's certain wholesome qualities that are in your mind right now, but they're not fully developed. They're not brought to full growth and full perfection. You're going to need to get to the point where these wholesome qualities are permeating in the mind, and the mind is filled up with these wholesome qualities. But there's certain qualities that are in your mind that are wholesome, but they haven't yet been brought to full growth and full perfection. And that's what you're going to need to do here, is apply effort to bring those to full growth and full perfection. I'll give you an example. Loving kindness is a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. This is active goodwill towards all beings. And this is the opposite of anger, hatred, and ill will. So in certain cases, you probably have loving kindness. You probably have concern for the misfortune of others, which is compassion, but you probably have this genuine interest in seeing all beings be well as well, right? You have this active goodwill towards all beings. But there are certain situations where you get angry and you get bitter and you get hostile, and you might put that out in your intention, speech, and actions towards people. And that's because your loving kindness hasn't been brought to full growth and full perfection. It's not permeating in the mind. It's not filling up the mind. So you're going to need to apply the effort to maintain this wholesome mental state and not allow it to fade, and work to increase the growth of it in the mind, where it's permeating in the mind. It's been brought to full growth and full perfection. Because as I mentioned, by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't even have the slightest dislike towards another being, that you can love all beings. They're not all doing the things that you want them to do, but you've gotten rid of all of that. You've gotten rid of the expectations and the longing, the yearning, and wanting people to be a certain way, because you understand impermanence and not everybody is going to be the same way as you. People are going to be different, right? But if you have expectations for someone to look a certain way, to speak a certain way, to act a certain way, if they don't do those things, you might dislike them. And that's a reflection of what's going on within your own mind. So you can actually transform this where you have loving kindness for all beings. And I'm going to be teaching you guys a tool and technique of how to actually cultivate this loving kindness in a couple of weeks. On a Wednesday, we're going to have a 4-part series on loving kindness meditation. So you can cultivate this in the mind and you have a tool to really transform the mind. But then in your day-to-day life, you're going to need to apply the right effort to arise this loving kindness in all situations. Then there's sympathetic joy. This is the opposite of envy and jealousy, where you might actually have sympathetic joy in certain situations. Maybe somebody's going on a trip to somewhere that you've been, maybe Australia or Thailand or England or Canada or Mexico. And they're like, hey, I'm going on this trip. And you're like, oh, that's wonderful. You'll have a great time. Enjoy yourself. I was there last year. That's a wonderful place. Have a great time, right? You might have this sympathetic joy for them because you didn't contribute to their success, but yet you have this joy. That's what sympathetic joy is. You have joy for others' success, even if you didn't contribute to it, right? But now you're in another situation. Maybe you're at work and you applied for a new job, a new promotion in your company, and this other coworker also applied for that same job, that same promotion, and maybe they got it instead of you. And now when you find out, maybe you're jealous, maybe you're envious towards them. That's because of your craving, your desire, your attachment. That's what's arising, that jealousy and that envy. So maybe in some situations you have sympathetic joy, where you're joyful for others' success, even though you didn't contribute to it. But in other situations, maybe you're jealous and envious. And that's because this sympathetic joy hasn't been brought to full growth and full perfection. So that's what you would like to do in this fourth one, is anytime you see a certain mental quality that hasn't been brought to full growth and full perfection, is apply right effort to bring that into the mind. So these are the 4 aspects of right effort. And the examples that I'm giving here are just examples. The things that are wholesome, that are in your mind, or the things that are unwholesome, that's going to be unique to you. So you're going to need to have the next step, which I'm going to teach you, right mindfulness. You're going to need that in order to be able to apply right effort. Without right mindfulness, you wouldn't actually be able to apply right effort. But here, it's important that you understand right effort. There's 4 aspects to it. Preventing unwholesome qualities from arising in the mind, abandon any unwholesome qualities that are currently in the mind, produce any wholesome qualities that are not yet in the mind, and maintain wholesome qualities that are currently in the mind. The way that I teach this to my young son is kick out the unwholesome and bring in the wholesome. That's what you'd like to do. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and see if you guys have any questions on right effort. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any and all questions that you like. So it looks like Yusuf is asking a question here, and then we'll go to Leo after that.
Just to clarify my understanding for the first effort, it is like if I know that I am going to be angry 100%, if I went and talked to that friend, and me willingly and talking to that friend and getting angry, that would be me not preventing the unwholesome coming to the mind. Would that be right?
Yeah, you would like to apply the effort to prevent that. So in that situation, it would be wise not to go. If you know you're going to go see this friend and you're just going to get angry, whatever you guys talk about, you got to apply the effort to not go and realize that it's unwise for you to put the mind in that situation. Okay, so it looks like Leo's next. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to also understand more the first one, prevent. Okay, I see don't go would be a way, but if already a thought comes in my mind, yeah, or is it? Does it mean with is it refer to the sensations when they come? They cut it off and let it go. This would be more abandon, right? The second one would be that, right? Cut it off and let it go.
So you're thinking about right mindfulness, which we haven't talked yet, but I know you know this. So if you're cutting it off as a bodily sensation, which what we talk about next, that's actually preventing the unwholesome quality from arising in the mind. Where once it comes into the mind as a feeling, that's abandoning the unwholesome mental state that has arisen in the mind. So that's why you would like to catch it more and more as a bodily sensation to prevent the mind from ever experiencing that.
Okay, now I understand. So prevent is like, sensation. Cut it off there.
Yeah, it's
before
like
it comes
it's like
completely.
blocking it from ever coming into the mind.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to check Facebook and YouTube now, see if we have any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So we're going to move into the next step, which is right mindfulness. And as I mentioned, you wouldn't be able to apply right effort without right mindfulness. You're going to need right mindfulness. All these steps are actually working together, particularly here in the mental discipline section. Every single one of them are connected. So you would need right mindfulness in order to practice right effort. So I'll read it to you and then I'll teach it to you. The Buddha says, "In what, monks, is right mindfulness? Here, monks, a monk resides, reflecting on body as body, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides, reflecting on feelings as feelings, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides, reflecting on mind as mind, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides, reflecting on mental objects as mental objects, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. This is called right mindfulness." So here he's talking about four things: body as body, feelings as feelings, mind as mind, mental objects as mental objects. This is referred to as the four foundations of mindfulness, which I'm going to teach you. But it's first important that you understand just generally what is mindfulness, because this word has made its way into common language and people aren't always using it in the same way as the Buddha. And that's okay, that's on them. But in order for you to be able to progress to enlightenment, you're going to need to understand it in the way that the Buddha teaches it. So generally, we can think about right mindfulness as awareness of mind. This is just general awareness of mind, that you're aware of your thoughts and your ideas, the various things that are going through your mind. You're going to need to have awareness of this. And it's the next step that's going to help you to be able to do that, which is right concentration. But for now, you can think about right mindfulness as awareness of mind. And sometimes that's where students hang out for a couple of months, just kind of generally building some awareness of mind, because you might be going through life completely unaware of what's going on within your own mind. So you're going to need to build this general awareness of the mind. Now, a lot of people, when they talk about mindfulness in day-to-day life, they might say, can you mindfully carry this glass of water to the table? And what they're really saying is, can you carefully carry this glass of water to the table? They're just replacing the word careful with mindful because they just don't understand how the Buddha used the word mindful. So you would like to think of it in the way that I'm teaching you, because that's what's going to help you to get to enlightenment. If other people choose to use it in a different way, that's up to them. But you can understand what mindfulness is awareness of mind, having awareness of your thoughts and your ideas and the things that are going through your mind. But then over time, as you develop your awareness of mind more and more, you would ultimately like to develop the four foundations of mindfulness. And this meditation that I'm going to teach you and that I have been teaching you and that you're going to learn about in the next step, that's what's helping you to do this. What you need to be able to do is develop awareness of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. What the bodily sensations are that we're talking about here, this isn't the aches and pains in the body. What the Buddha is talking about here is this early warning system that you have that's alerting you that you're about to become angry or frustrated or sad, or even those pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, and elation. There's going to be some bodily sensations associated with these conditional feelings that are starting to be experienced prior to the feeling. Before the feeling comes into the mind, there are some bodily sensations that you may or may not even be aware of right now. For something like anger, you might notice tingling in the body rising up towards the head. You might notice tightening in the chest. You might notice tightening in the throat. heat in the face, pressure in the skull. This is the early warning system. This is alerting you, hey, you're about to get angry. You're about to get frustrated. You're about to get bitter and harsh and hostile here. And you have the ability to take action at that point. And that's where right effort comes in, that you apply the effort to abandon that because you know that it's going to become a feeling next. And if you're not aware of this, you can start paying attention to this because not only does it happen with the painful feelings, but it's happening with the pleasant ones too. You might notice some tingling across your shoulders, up the back of your neck and over your skull. We call these warm fuzzies in some cultures, right? And you might even be leaning into that because it's very pleasurable to experience. But that's alerting you that your mind's about to get a conditioned pleasant feeling. And you would like to cut that off and let that go. Because as long as you allow your mind to get that conditioned pleasant feeling, the painful ones are waiting right around the corner for you. It's just a matter of time. Because if you allow your mind to base its inner feelings on this condition, and now it's happy because it's sunny, well, when the sun's gone, you're going to experience the painful feelings. Or if you get so happy about your bank account being a certain level, as soon as you get happy with that and your bank account goes down, now you're going to be frustrated and angry. Or you get so happy or excited about a new boyfriend or new girlfriend, or you get so happy and excited about a new job. Well, as soon as those things change, your mind's going to end up in the painful feelings. So you need to be willing to let go of this temporary pleasure in order to get to the permanent joy and the permanent happiness. So when you notice those bodily sensations, that's your opportunity to take action and cut that off and let it go. You're not suppressing your feelings. Sometimes people think that you're suppressing your feelings when I talk about this. But what you're actually doing is you're cutting it off before it even becomes a feeling. It hasn't even become a feeling yet because it's just a bodily sensation. And depending on where you are in your practice, you might have no awareness of this whatsoever, that this is even occurring. And if that's the case, you've got some work to do to be able to observe this. But if you notice that these bodily sensations are occurring, you might get anywhere from like a second or two or longer. I've seen these bodily sensations last upwards of 8 to 10 seconds after I've trained my mind for an extended period of time. And that gives you more and more time to take action. And depending on how strong your craving, desire, attachment is going to depend how quickly it goes from a bodily sensation straight into a feeling. Whereas if you don't have much control or discipline over your mind, you might go right to, past the bodily sensations and right into a feeling. But the more you train your mind, you're going to get this longer and longer period of time where those bodily sensations are there and you can take action to cut it off and let it go. Because if you miss it as a bodily sensation, it's going to become a feeling. And you're not interested in that conditioned feeling. Because this is like if you were going to take a boat from like England to the USA, if you're out in the middle of the boat in the ocean and the water comes rushing in, you've got a real problem to deal with. You've got to get rid of this water. This boat's going to sink. And it's the same thing, is that if you allow the anger and the frustration to come into the mind, you've got a real problem to deal with. You've got to get rid of this. And it's the same thing with the conditional pleasant feelings too, right? So if you can cut it off and let it go as a bodily sensation, you've protected the mind. And now you can keep on sailing through your day, right? No matter what you're doing, you didn't get angry. No matter what it was, you noticed the bodily sensation coming, you cut it off and let it go, and hey, everything's cool, right? So that's what you would like to do, is cut it off as a bodily sensation. But you're not going to be able to do this in every situation, especially when you first get started. Eventually, when you develop your mind enough, you will be able to cut it off and let it go as a bodily sensation every single time. And when you get to that point, which for some people can take 6 months, a year, 2 years, or even longer, you're really close to enlightenment at that point. You're probably about 1 to 3 years from enlightenment if you can cut it off and let it go every single time as a bodily sensation, right? So this is what you would ultimately like to get to. But as you're making your way towards enlightenment, maybe for the next few months, the next few years, you're going to miss it as a bodily sensation in some situations. And it's going to become a feeling. So if it becomes a feeling and you are angry, you are frustrated, or you're noticing conditional pleasant feelings, you can cut it off and let it go there too. That would be the next best thing. Because if you don't cut it off as a feeling, it's going to start affecting the condition of your mind. This is where you were maybe like angry or frustrated or grumpy or irritable for like a few hours, a few days, maybe a week or two. because you didn't cut off as a bodily sensation, you didn't cut it off as a feeling because you didn't even know about these things, and now it affected the general condition of your mind for a couple of hours, a couple of days, or a week or two. And who likes to go around feeling grumpy and irritable, right? So you would like to basically transform your mind and cut it off as a bodily sensation. Because if you don't, it's going to become a feeling, it's going to affect the condition of the mind, and now it's going to feed what's called a mental object. What a mental object is a deeply rooted container in the mind that's going to motivate unskillful conduct. So all of the 10 fetters that I'm going to teach you next week, those are all mental objects. And you need to purify the mind of these mental objects. So you need to be aware of the symptoms when they're arising. So I teach at different times more and more detail about the 10 fetters so that you can build this awareness of these symptoms of these mental objects that are arising. You know, we weren't born with ill will in our mind. That's an example of a mental object. We weren't born with that. It actually got developed over time. Because essentially when we were a little kid, when we were like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, we had a craving, desire, attachment. We had plenty of them. And we wanted chocolate and ice cream perhaps. And we begged our mom and dad, give me chocolate, give me chocolate, give me ice cream, give me ice cream. And mommy and daddy were like, sure, here you go. You can have chocolate and ice cream. And we're like, you're the best mommy and daddy ever. And if we got ice cream like 2 or 3 times in one day, oh man, that was like the best day ever, right? But there was a time that came along where we asked mommy and daddy for ice cream or chocolate, and they said, no, you can't have it. We got angry. We had these bodily sensations that we weren't even aware of. The mind became angry. Then we were grumpy and irritable for a few minutes, a few hours, or however long. And then it formed this mental object of ill will. Because we didn't go into the nursery when we were born hating other babies. That's what ill will is. It's anger and hatred. We didn't hate other babies in the nursery because we didn't have that mental object yet. But we had craving, desire, attachment. And when we had craving, desire, attachment, as those cravings got fulfilled, we got pleasant feelings. But when they didn't get fulfilled, we got angry and bitter and hostile. And it went through this life cycle. That's what the Buddha is teaching you here, is a life cycle that your mind is going to experience as a result of your cravings, desires, attachments. That when you have craving, desire, attachment in the mind, those things are going to get triggered. And you're either going to get pleasant feelings if you get what you want, you're going to get painful feelings if you don't get what you want, and then there's these neither painful nor pleasant feelings. So if you don't take any action, then you're not working to transform your mind. You're going to need to apply right effort. That's what the right mindfulness is allowing you to do, is to be able to see those unwholesome qualities coming up in the mind, and then you can apply right effort to eliminate them. So the way that this might look in a practical sense is, say you're sitting in front of the TV and you're watching the news, and something comes on the news and you're noticing the frustration as a bodily sensation. The chest is starting to tighten, there's tingling in the chest, the throat is starting to tighten, you're getting this heat in your face and pressure in your skull. If you do nothing, it's going to become a feeling, and now you've got a real problem to deal with. But what you can do is you can apply right effort and cut that off and let it go. Turn off the TV, get up and go for a walk, go out for a bike ride, go get a glass of water in the kitchen or something like this. That's redirecting your mind and cutting it off and sending your mind in a different direction so that you don't allow the mind to form that conditioned feeling. Because these bodily sensations, it's this early warning system where your mind's essentially sharing with you, I'm about to get a conditioned feeling, buddy. I'm about to get a conditioned feeling. I'm about to get a conditioned feeling. And you got to say, nope, I'm not going to let you do that, right? You cut it off and let it go. You don't allow that conditioned feeling to form. Because if you keep allowing that conditioned feeling to form, your mind's going to stay wired that way. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to transform the mind. That when the mind is trying to form that conditioned feeling and you get alerted to it with your bodily sensations, you say, nope, I'm not going to let you do that. And if you do that enough, eventually you won't have any conditioned feelings even arising, because you've cut it off and cut it off and cut it off so many times that all the cravings, desires, attachments have been eliminated from the mind. And you can experience whatever you experience in life, and there's no arising of any discontentedness. But if you keep allowing these feelings to be formed, these conditioned feelings, your mind's just going to stay wired that way. It's going to affect the condition of your mind, and then you're going to form these mental objects more and more, and you're going to more deeply root them into the mind. So essentially what you're doing is you're putting a blockade at the bodily sensations, and you're blocking anything from coming past that. And then all the while, you're going to learn tools and techniques to uproot these mental objects out of the mind, purifying the mind and clearing them out of the mind. This is the ideal situation. And eventually you'll purify your mind and you'll get to enlightenment. But just understand that between now and enlightenment, you're going to experience some conditioned feelings. You're not going to be able to learn what it is that I'm sharing with you and go out into the world and immediately start practicing it to perfection. You can start practicing it, but you're not going to be able to practice it to perfection just by learning it one time. So there's other things that you need to learn to be able to develop the mind and develop these 4 foundations of mindfulness. But this is essentially what you're working towards, is that you're aware of those bodily sensations, that early warning system alerting you that you're about to get a feeling. Then, if you notice that the mind has experienced the feeling and you haven't been able to cut it off as a bodily sensation, then cut it off as a feeling. And if you weren't able to cut it off there, it's going to affect the condition of the mind, where now for a few hours or a day or two or a week or two, you're going to be experiencing the discontentedness. And that's where you would like to catch it there, if you can, and cut it off and let it go. And then you'd like to get awareness of these mental objects so you can uproot them out of the mind. But more and more, you'd like to back this up and catch it sooner and sooner as a bodily sensation. And the next step that I'm going to teach you is what's going to help you to be able to do that. So you're going to need to accumulate the benefits of all of these factors of the path. And right concentration is what's going to help you to develop right mindfulness. And it's right mindfulness that's going to help you apply right effort. So let me see what questions you guys have on right mindfulness. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Marcy has a question. There's a bunch of others, so we'll just take you guys one at a time. Go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, Teacher David. So I'm going to tell you a situation. I went and picked up a friend from work after I had taken my dogs to the beach. And I do understand that I am going to have some kind of unwholesome karma come to me because I do have animals in my life. So I understand that. But anyway, as I was driving home, I'm driving down my street. My next door neighbors had their dog off leash. I noticed that inside I started to feel a little bit of like anxiety. And I know that that was there because I have an attachment to my animals. You know, I don't want to see them get hurt. But what I did is I instantly, when I started feeling that, I just said, let it go, Marcy, let it go, let it go. Then I asked the person who I brought home, I said, I'm going to have you exit the car, and then I'm going to kind of get my animals together and bring them in because, you know, the other dog was off leash, and I have run into situations before where the dog has come charging. So I'm in the car, I got my dogs quiet, I've gotten the mind to quiet down, the sensation is starting to dissipate, and I say, okay, I'm going to exit my car. I grab their leashes, I'm holding the one puppy, I open the door, I go to step out, the other dog comes charging. So I quickly take my older dog and I kind of bump him back into the car, and I kind of close the door and wedge myself in between, and the other dog was just sitting there barking aggressively. Even now, like as I'm talking about it, I can start to feel it. But I kept telling myself, let it go, Marcy. You have an attachment to your animals. This is what's causing this discontentedness. Let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. The owner finally came and removed the dog. I then took my dogs and I walked inside. I noticed that the mind was really, that sensation was so vivid in me. I could keep feeling the sensation there. And I kept saying, let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. And then at that point I said, you know something, I'm having some ill will. I could feel the ill will of like, you know, why aren't these people taking control of their animal? Why are they letting it do these things? And then I kept saying, Marcy, you have an attachment to your animals. This is what's bringing it on. So I ended up sitting myself down and I did some breathing mindfulness meditation. And then I did some loving kindness meditation for the dog and for the owners. My question to you, Teacher David, is one, did I handle that in a wholesome way? Was I handling that in a way that was helping the mind, or was I not? And Um, I guess that would be the core question there.
Yeah, what you just described is what I would recommend for you. You handled that well. And the more that you experience those kinds of situations, you'll be able to eventually let go of these attachments. So while you have a certain expectation, a certain want of your neighbor to deal with their dog in a certain way, this is actually really good for you. These people are like little teachers in your life. If they weren't doing that, you wouldn't have been able to get all this benefit, because by putting your mind in that situation, it's triggering this craving and you're having to cut it off and cut it off and cut it off. So you can turn this into appreciation, where you appreciate the fact that they're exposing this craving for you, and it's going to help you to ultimately let go of it. Some things that you can do in addition to what you've already talked about, if you haven't already, but it sounds like you need to do it some more, is you can do contemplation of death for your animals. You've learned that from me before, and this will help you in times in your day-to-day life where you can just sit and you can think about and reflect on the death of your animals to trigger any kind of potential craving. So that's like a proactive way of training the mind. What you just talked about is like in the moment, what is the best things to be doing? And what you just talked about is in the moment, that's what you would like to be doing. And then because you notice the anger arising, you brought in the loving kindness meditation. That's what you would also like to do as a proactive training. But you would like to do this contemplation of death as well.
Okay. Thank you, Teacher David.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Is it Lu Hula? I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly.
It's Lou. Hi, David. Good to see you again.
Hello. Is this Michelle? Or Lou, yes, the young lady from China
Oh, this is Lou.
who's going to be living in San Francisco, right?
Yes, that's
Oh,
me.
okay. There's a lady named Michelle.
Yeah, that is
There's a lady
me.
named Michelle Lou that I just met this past week. I thought that was you, but now I know who you are. Yes. Hello, Lou. You have a question?
Yeah, so I've been actually practicing meditation since I left Thailand. It's been helpful, but I also find that, in this particular case of mindfulness, I actually find feelings that occur because of the things that occur again and again. So let me explain. So, for example, I recently got into this conflict with one of my coworkers, for example. And as soon as we got into this conflict, I noticed there's body sensations. So I took some action, I took a deep breath, and then it went away. Like the body sensation went away. So then after a few seconds, I came back and then deal with the conflict without much of the feeling or anger or frustration. So I thought I got through this path, but later when I kind of reflect on the conflict that we get, and it became more and more like this thought of the conflict just occurring in the mind again and again, and eventually led to a headache. So apparently there's something missing between the blockage and like something, the body sensation or the feelings still occur in the mind without me noticing it. So I'm trying to figure out like what happened in this scenario, and what if we have just to go back and deal with something that would trigger our feelings and body sensations again and again? How do we deal with that?
Sure. So what's happening here is there's some craving, desire, attachment you have in your mind. And based on the contact that you were having with this coworker through the eyes and ears and however else you were contacting this individual, it was triggering that craving. And when that came up, you noticed the bodily sensations, which is helpful, and you would like to cut that off and let it go, which was what you did, where you focused on the breath and you were able to cut that off and let it go. But then when you thought about it later, it triggered the craving again. And you're going to need to kind of trigger these things multiple times. That's why I mentioned to Marcy to do the contemplation of death for her animals. In fact, Marcy, if you can envision that your dogs have been viciously attacked by another dog and ripped apart, this is actually going to really help you to eliminate your craving. I know it sounds pretty graphic, but that's what you would like to be able to do in order to trigger your mind's craving, and then you have to cut that off and let it go. And the same thing for you, Lou, is that this situation that it occurred, it's pointing out to you that you have certain cravings, desires, attachments there that is arising discontentedness. And while you were able to cut it off in the moment, later on, that craving was still there. the mind hadn't fully let it go. One of the ways that the Buddha talks about these cravings, and you'll see this for yourself, is he calls them stubborn. These stubborn cravings. So even though we say cut it off and let it go, it's really like cut it off and 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 cut it off. You can be cutting off some of these cravings for multiple years before you let them go. If you remember, Lou, you and I were in a conversation where you asked me quietly, you said, David, what was the hardest thing for you to let go of? And I told you about a certain thing that was really hard for me to let go of. I had to cut that off for many years before I ultimately let that go, right? So you're going to need to do this with certain cravings. If it's like a chocolate bar, and you go into 7-Eleven, it's not there, you can let it go, right? But if it's something more significant that you're having a craving about, it's going to be a lot more work to cut this back. It's almost like a wild bush, and this wild bush is growing, and you're cutting it back and cutting it back and cutting it back. But then when you have your back turned, it kind of grows a little bit more. And then you got to cut it back and cut it back and cut it back. And then it might grow a little bit. And eventually you'll cut it off so much that you'll uproot this out of the mind. That's the mental objects. When you uproot the mental objects out of your mind, that's where it'll be completely gone for good. And it won't arise any longer. So in this situation, you handled it well when you first experienced it. Then when you started thinking about it afterwards, that's where you would once again like to cut that off and let it go each time it's arising any discontentedness. And then because there was some anger and frustration towards this coworker, you're going to need to put them in your loving kindness meditation for a period of time so that you can get rid of any kind of anger or frustration associated with this person.
Got it. And just to clarify, because it's very helpful to understand that afterwards, when I think about this, I should get rid of my feelings and body sensations every time. But should I just get rid of or is it appropriate to get rid of the thought of the conflict altogether? Is that what is ultimately causing the problem?
It depends, because there's certain things that you need to probably learn about this situation. So it's wise to look back at this situation and evaluate it and figure out, like, what could I have done differently to handle this better? Because that's what's going to help you cultivate wisdom. But you might need to wait a few days or even a week or two before you look back on it, because if it's arising too much discontentedness, it's not wise to kind of look at it right away. So you might need to distance yourself from it for a period of time and then look back on it and see if there's any wisdom that you can cultivate and you can bring on board so that in the future you can handle it better. So eventually you'll be able to clear it out of your mind and just put it long in the past. But you would like to take each opportunity like this to cultivate wisdom, because if you just completely wipe it out of your mind and you don't pay any attention to it whatsoever, you didn't get the opportunity to cultivate wisdom, so therefore it's going to happen again. So if you can bring in some wisdom, so that way if you're in that same situation in the future, you'll know how to deal with it. And then once you've cultivated the needed wisdom, now you can just move on, and you don't even have to think about it anymore, because you've done all the thinking and the introspection that you can just put it long in your past.
Got it. That's very helpful. Thank you, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. Nice to see you online here. Okay, it looks like Ted and/or Kristen has a question. Go ahead, guys.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the teachings this evening. I have a really hard one. I'm incredibly in love with my wife, and the thought of, I get warm and fuzzies, but I also, it's really important to me to be of service and to know that she's well and her well-being. And all that seems like a total package. And it's really hard for me to understand even the good that I feel from that, to cut that off and let that go. I just, the willingness to do that is just not there. And I don't know if it's out of fear that those, I don't know what it is, but it's really hard for me to consider cutting off and letting go. I guess that reward that I get from, I don't know how to put it into words, but I think you understand.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the problem in the mind, that it wants those pleasant feelings. It wants those conditional pleasant feelings, and it gets those from its cravings, desires, attachments. And as long as you allow the mind to do that, when that condition doesn't exist, your mind's going to experience the painful feelings. So, for example, if your wife got in a car accident and she was in the hospital for several days, that would probably be very painful for you. And that's because the mind is experiencing these pleasant feelings when she's well. So, what you would like to be able to do is have that care, have that concern, have that love and that genuine interest in seeing her be well, but don't allow the mind to experience conditioned feelings based on her status of what's going on with her. You need to be able to see these pleasant feelings, these conditional ones, to be just as much a part of the problem as the painful ones. Because if the mind can only be happy when wife is healthy, when our bank account is a certain amount, when maybe we're traveling or this is this, all these conditions have to be met, and the mind can only be happy in that situation. And when those things aren't met, then the mind is in these painful feelings. So what you would like to get to the point of is where your mind is happy and joyful all the time. If your wife is healthy and well, great, you're happy, but you're not happy because she's healthy. You're just happy because you're happy. Because then when she's unhealthy, now you can maintain your happiness. You can maintain your joy despite the fact that she's unhealthy, because you need to be able to recognize this as just impermanence, that sometimes she's going to be healthy and sometimes she's going to be unhealthy. And that's normal part of life. But if your mind craves for it to be one way or the other, that means that when she's healthy, you'll be happy, and when she's unhealthy, you'll be sad or frustrated or some other discontent feeling. So to be able to come into this peace and joy where the mind is always peaceful and always joyful, you're going to have to let go of this attachment. And this is one of the attachments that's the hardest. The people who are closest to you, your life partner, your children, your parents, your brothers and sisters, these are some of the more challenging ones. And you heard from Marcy, even animals, right? If you have animals in your life, there's going to be certain attachments there. So there's other training beyond just what's explained in the Eightfold Path that essentially integrates into the Eightfold Path. That's going to help you to get rid of that attachment to an actual person. But all the factors of the Eightfold Path have to be on board first, and you need to be able to learn this and practice this consistently before you get to the point where you do some of these other things. So right now, learning the Eightfold Path and developing that is what is best for you, Ted. But then in the future, there's a course which you sat in on part of it called Harmony in Relationships, where that's going to teach you how to eliminate your attachment to the person who's closest to you, like your wife. There's a class in there that's going to help you to learn about contemplation of death and triggering that so that you can cut it off. But right now may not be the time for you to do that. It's kind of like peeling back an onion. When you're peeling away these cravings, that the outer layers peel off really easily, but when you get deeper into the core, it's harder to peel those back. So you usually deal with the outer ones first, because those are the easier ones to fluff off, and you build some confidence in doing this work. And then you see the joy and the peacefulness coming to mind because you have peeled away some of those outer layers, so that then when you get into the deeper ones, like your wife, and you're trying to eliminate that attachment, that the mind's already been softened up a little bit. You've already got some experience doing this. You've got some more skills and tools and techniques. The mind is more developed, and it's going to be more willing to let this go. So I don't suggest that you work on this right away, but whenever you see those conditioned pleasant feelings coming in about, oh, my wife is happy, so therefore I'm going to be happy, it would be wise for you to cut that off. But then there's some proactive things that you're going to be able to do that is going to target this more closely.
So feel joy all the way through, whether she's happy or she tells me to clean the house. Either one is a good place. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Exactly. Yeah, you would like to have joy no matter what is transpiring. And you're not joyful because she's sick, for example. You're joyful despite that you understand that this body can't be permanently healthy. And if every time she's sick, you're going to be angry or sad or frustrated or irritated, then you're going to keep experiencing that over and over. So the real secret, even though there's no secret about the path to enlightenment, the real key is to be able to see those pleasant feelings, those conditional ones, as just as much a part of the problem as the painful ones. Because if you allow the mind to get the pleasant feelings, then the painful ones are going to be waiting for you right around the corner. It's only a matter of time that condition changes, and now the mind can't experience the pleasantness anymore. It's going to move to the painful part.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so it looks like Leo has a question.
Yeah, thank you, David. From the pleasant feeling to the painful feeling, how long can this take? Like, is it sometimes it's right away, I think, but I think in last class you said you made an example where like maybe a year later or something like that it happened, that you had frustration because of this moment where you were happy or whatever.
Yeah, every situation is going to be different. It all depends on impermanence. It can be 1 second, it can be, multiple years. It really depends when the condition changes. For example, if you get so happy that your mom's alive, 60, 80 years later, she dies, you're going to be sad or frustrated, right? So it really depends on when the impermanence comes. It can be a very elongated time or it can be really short. So it really depends.
Okay. And then another question. You said that sensations, before they become a feeling, it can take from 1 to 10 seconds. How about feelings, from feelings to a condition of the mind? How long this can take? Do you know that?
Yeah, so the feeling is something that's happening very acutely. It's happening in an instant after having gone through the bodily sensations. And if you don't cut off and let go of the feeling, and now in a matter of seconds and minutes, it's going to start affecting the condition of the mind. So if you're generally irritable and grumpy for more than 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, now if you're into the 5 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, that's the condition of the mind that's being experienced now. So you need to be able to really stay attentive to the mind so that you can cut off and let go at the bodily sensations. And if not, cut it off at the feelings.
Okay. You said that when there are 5 minutes already, if there's anger for 5 minutes, then it's already a condition of the mind.
Exactly. Even 2 or 3 minutes, it's already the condition of the mind is being affected. You can notice when your mind slows down enough and you have enough mindfulness, you'll be able to sit there and be like, there's the bodily sensations. Whoa, there's the feeling. Like you can feel it, like whoom, coming right into the mind. And now if you just sit there and look at that feeling, and now you'll feel the grumpiness and irritability starting to set in within a matter of seconds and minutes.
Okay. Condition of the mind, to cut it off there, it's also not so difficult, right? It's or is it far more difficult than doing it when it is a feeling?
Yeah, the longer that you allow it to persist, the harder it is to cut it off and let it go. So if you allow it to get to the condition of the mind, it's a lot harder to cut it off and let it go there. So that's why you would really like to back this up and catch it as a bodily sensation. It's more challenging to develop your mindfulness to the point where you can notice the bodily sensations, but once you develop it, and you cut it off and let it go, it's a lot easier to cut it off there. Because once it becomes a feeling or affects the condition of the mind, it just becomes progressively more challenging to cut it off and let it go.
Okay, because I'm sometimes not sure. I think sometimes when I have a sensation, I think, it might be there already for a few seconds. But now I just realized it. But that would mean that anger must be also there already, or whatever feeling, because you said it's only 1 to 10 minutes and 10 seconds. And 10 seconds, when you're a good practitioner, when you're already developed, then the sensation can take 10 seconds. So I guess in my case, it would be only maybe a few seconds, 1 to 3 or something. So sometimes I'm not sure if my sensations, I already have a feeling and the sensation is still in the background. Yeah, maybe it could be that. So
that's why you would like to keep developing the mind with all of these factors, because more and more you'll hone the mind, you'll have more discipline and more control, and you'll be able to take action on these things much more readily.
Okay, for example, I sometimes have the feeling that if there's a sensation, and then I try to cut it off, but it sometimes takes a few seconds, then it fade away and it's gone. Is it when I try this, let's say 2 seconds, and I realize the sensation, and I begin the process of cutting it off? Is then there a gap of that it becomes a feeling, or is this because I try to cut it off, or is it? Yeah.
If you've cut it off and let it go as a bodily sensation, it won't become a feeling.
but sometimes I'm in the process of cutting it off, but it doesn't seem to go right away. It seems that I need to say it like 10 times, cut it off, and then it goes.
Yeah, that's because your mind isn't fully developed yet. You haven't accumulated enough benefits of meditation and developing your mindfulness, training your mind to let go, practicing generosity, and all the other factors. You've only been practicing with me for maybe 4-6 months, I'm not sure. So you're going to need to develop your mind more. So that's why you got to keep consistently doing this work. But the fact that you're where you're at now, that's really good, but it's just not going to instantly go away because your mind isn't fully developed yet.
Okay, just try to understand, if let's say I realized it, the bodily sensation, and let's say I needed like 20 seconds to cut it off finally. But then it would be already a feeling, right? Because it took me 20 seconds, 20 times saying cut it off, cut it off, cut it off, cut it off. Then it would fade away. Is it like that, or?
It sounds like it, yeah. If you're taking that long to cut it off, I haven't seen bodily sensations last for that long. It most likely has become a feeling by that point.
Okay. It sometimes seems for me that I have a feeling there, a sensation there, and it takes me like a lot of seconds. Then it goes away, or sometimes it goes a bit. It becomes weaker, and then it goes.
Yes.
Is it normal? Or
yeah, so keep working at this, because that's the normal process. You're gradually cultivating the mind, gradually training it, gradually practicing to hone it more and more and more. By the time you get into the jhanas and the first and second and third stage of enlightenment, it's not even a thought. Like, you notice the bodily sensations, boom, you just cut it off right away and it's gone. Right? So that's what you would ultimately like to get to, but you're just not there yet. So you just keep practicing and you're headed in the right direction. So don't want to be somewhere that you're not. Just realize that you're headed in the right direction, and what you're describing is completely normal. So just keep working in that direction.
Okay. It just seems a bit, how you say, I just have no really clarity about, this is a feeling, this is a sensation, this is maybe because the brain is changing. I have not really, it's like a bit chaotic, so I cannot really, and I don't see so many different sensations, and I cannot say like, oh, this is because of anger, this sensation is because of jealousy, or this is because of whatever. I don't have that actually,
So keep working at it. Keep developing the mind.
All right.
Yeah, you need to keep developing the mind. You're not there yet. So your mindfulness isn't fully developed yet. By the time you get into the jhanas, your mindfulness will be fully developed.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, it looks like Yusuf is back. Go ahead, sir.
Those days when a craving hits the mind, like I feel it so much, it is like it is alone. Sorry. It is like very painful those days to feel a craving. It is like when a craving hits my mind, I say like, wow, why it is now so harmful, but back then it wasn't. Do I need like now or those days to put like much more effort than before to focus on the meditation? Like maybe instead of doing like 15 or 20 minutes, I need to do like 13 just to develop the ability to let go easily. Should I like maybe worry or something about that, or it is just normal, even though it is now like I can see it more clearly and it is hurting more, much more. It is just normal to feel that I don't need to like hurry up in my meditation or something, or the ability to let go.
Yeah, you would like to build up your meditation practice to 2 or 3 sessions for 30 minutes or more. That's what I'm going to be talking about next, because that's what's going to help develop your mind. If you're still at the 10, 15 minutes mark, that's okay. That's where you're at now, but you would like to gradually expand that to longer and longer. You're going to need more and more meditation in order to really hone the mind. So whatever you're experiencing now and your abilities to have mindfulness and cut these things off and let them go, that's based on the 10, 15 minutes of meditation that you're doing. So you've got some room to grow here. I know this is kind of silly analogy when I'm talking about Buddhism, but I think you guys will understand this, that if you've ever drank alcohol, for example, the first time you drank and you drank that one beer or two beers or whatever drinks you had, it probably had a real big effect on you. And then over time, your tolerance increased and you needed more and more alcohol in order to be able to experience the feelings and effects of it. Well, meditation is the same way. When you first start meditating, like 3 minutes, 5 minutes can have a real big effect because your mind is like a dry sponge and it hasn't really ever had this kind of training before. But then as you go, you're going to notice that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it doesn't have the same effect anymore because your mind's reached to a certain level of development. And in order to really break through and get to increased levels of development of your mind, you're going to need to gradually work towards the 30-minute mark, just like you need to build up the tolerance of an alcohol, for example, which I don't suggest anybody ingest any alcohol, but you understand the analogy with the meditation, that it's going to take more and more of it. But by that time, you should be clearing out more and more of the unbeneficial things in your life. You should be bringing your friendships to a certain amount where you have a certain amount of wholesome friends, that you've cleared out any kind of erroneous, unbeneficial things in your life. And you're starting to let go of a lot of these cravings, that you're not out there in the world just chasing your cravings anymore, that you've kind of working on honing your mind so you'll have more time and ability to dedicate to things like meditation. And that's why it can take 6 months, a year, even 2 years to build up your practice to that point.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to check Facebook and YouTube, see what we've got here. It looks like Mayu Lee is asking a question on Facebook. Certain situations, I'm able to notice the bodily sensations and cut it off before it becomes a feeling. Some situations, the body sensations quickly become feelings for a few seconds before I can cut it off. But most subtle craving situations I miss, or sometimes I notice, but was complacent to cut it off. This mind knows what's best, but yet stubborn and complacent to cut it off and let it go. I feel so exhausted at times where I just allow the mind to run off without implementing the 7 factors of enlightenment. Yes, that's something that can occur. You're describing a mind that is in transition, that there's complacency, that there's stubbornness, that you feel exhausted, because to be vigilant over the mind in the way that the Buddha teaches and have that diligence, it can get exhausting sometimes. And this is why by the time you fully transform your mind will never go back to experiencing anger and frustration ever again, because you've worked so diligently to be able to get to this point where you fully transform your mind. You're never going to be like, I kind of liked it when I was angry and I was like bitter and harsh and hostile to people and I was disrespectful. And then people were bitter and harsh and hostile with me and they were disrespectful. I kind of liked that. I'd like to go back to that. By the time you've cleared out your mind, you've put forth all this effort, and you've cleaned up your life and you've cleaned up your relationships, you'll be thoroughly enjoying what you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis with your mind, but also in your relationships in your day-to-day life. And your mind will never revert back to anger and frustration. So you need to go through this to be able to more develop the mind, sticking with all the factors of the Eightfold Path, and you will get exhaustion sometimes. And you need to just be able to notice that, hey, the mind needs some rest. Yeah, there's still some complacency there, but I'm going to get to that when it's time. So don't push yourself, don't force yourself, but just note as you are the areas that you need improvement, and then just keep working at it consistently and diligently. Be determined and dedicated, and that's what's going to continue to see you through. One of the phrases that the Buddha uses is he teaches you, don't shrink back from the struggle, because there's a certain struggle involved, right? When you're working towards enlightenment, there's a certain struggle. And if you shrink back from it, then you're just allowing your mind to continue to experience the discontent feelings. But if you turn around and you walk towards it, now you can actually cultivate the mind and experience real improvement. It's kind of like if you were at the bottom of the mountain and you were walking up this mountain and you're like kind of halfway up and your thighs are burning, your ankles are hurting, your back's hurting. What would you do? You'd probably sit down on a log and kind of get a breath, right? You'd probably drink some water, have some trail mix or something like that. Let the thighs rest, let the ankles rest, let the back rest. And you just kind of think things through a little bit, catch your breath, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then you'd probably start going back up the mountain again. And that's the kind of things that you need to do with this path as well. Okay, I don't see any questions on YouTube anywhere. So I'm going to move forward into explaining the last step of the Eightfold Path, which is right concentration. Here, with the words of the Buddha, what you're seeing is him describing what's called the jhanas. The jhanas are preliminary phases that the mind experiences before you get to the first stage of enlightenment. As you're moving through these preliminary phases, there are certain enhanced qualities that you're going to start experiencing. And as your mind's experiencing those qualities are persistent. It's not that you're turning these jhanas on or off. It's not that you're only experiencing the jhanas while you're in meditation. In fact, in order to get to the jhanas, these preliminary phases that the mind is experiencing, you need to actually put together all the factors of the Eightfold Path. It's not just meditation. So I'm not going to read this to you, because what the Buddha is explaining to you is he's explaining to you the results or the byproduct of having put together all the factors of the Eightfold Path. But in other parts of his teachings, he explains to you how to do and how to practice right concentration. So that's what I'm going to explain to you. But just understand that there are these preliminary phases that the mind goes through that you're going to hear about next week, where the mind is experiencing these jhanas, where the mind is having these enhanced qualities. I'll just explain one of them to you so that you can understand what I'm talking about here. The word jhana, it means meditative absorption or mental absorption, because the mind has absorbed a certain amount of the teachings and it's absorbed a certain amount of meditation. And now that the mind has absorbed a certain amount of the teachings and you're practicing and you've transformed your mind to a certain degree, you're going to start noticing these enhanced qualities of mind. It's kind of like the light bulb is flickering and giving you indications that you're headed in the right direction and you've put together the Eightfold Path to a certain degree. One of those indications are that you're going to have unification of the mind or oneness of mind, where in the unenlightened state, before the jhanas, you have a conscious mind and you have a subconscious mind. Both of these are actually polluted, but the subconscious mind is more polluted than the conscious mind. So if you've been sitting around talking with friends and you just blurted something out and you were like, why did I say that? I don't think that way. Why did I just say that? That was so silly of me. That's your subconscious mind, this really polluted mind, throwing things up into your conscious mind. And because you didn't have the discipline, your mind just kind of blurted it out. And now you might have experienced unwholesome results as part of that. But what you would ultimately like to do is get to what's called unification of the mind or oneness of mind. Because as long as you have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind, where you're not aware of the subconscious mind, you can't actually completely purify your mind, because this really polluted subconscious mind, you don't have awareness of it. So as you're developing your Eightfold Path in its entirety, you're going to get to the point where you have full awareness of the entire mind. There's no such thing as a conscious mind and a subconscious mind for somebody who's in the second jhana or beyond, that's now been unified, that you have full awareness of the mind. Some people refer to this as opening of the third eye, or the divine eye, or something like this. Essentially, the mind becomes very introspective and inward looking, and this is where the mind can be very contemplative. And you'll experience this in the second jhana, and you'll notice that you have full awareness of the mind. And people can have a lot of emotion during this time, where you become very sensitive in your emotions, because you start being able to see your entire mind, and you didn't even realize how polluted it was, and you're like, oh my goodness, look at all that pollution. It's kind of like walking into a room that you thought was pretty clean, and oh my goodness, look at all this stuff everywhere. It's so dirty, right? This is what you're going to realize when you get unification of the mind. It can be really impactful to you. So there's certain qualities that I'm going to teach you when we start talking about the jhanas, but today I'm going to share with you how to practice right concentration, because that's what you need at this point in your development on the path, because we just restarted the group learning program from the beginning. There's two aspects of practicing right concentration that you're going to need to develop. Developing a daily meditation practice and practicing singleness of mind. And this is why I've been helping students to develop their meditation practice. That I've done this 4-part series that is concluding this Wednesday, where I'm helping you to develop breathing mindfulness meditation. And then we're going to go into a 4-part series on loving kindness meditation. And there's 2 other specialized meditations that sometimes you might need. So I teach those as well when we get to chapter 11. But these first 2 of breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation, these are needed by all individuals on the path to enlightenment, because they're addressing 2 of the 3 primary problems in the mind. there's 10 individual problems that the Buddha discovered, but they kind of bubble up to 3 high-level problems, which we're going to be talking about in chapter 8. It's called craving, anger, and ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. Breathing mindfulness meditation is helping you eliminate craving, desire, attachment. Loving kindness meditation is helping you to eliminate the anger, hatred, ill will, and all those lesser versions. And then cultivation of wisdom is what's helping you to eliminate the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. So you're going to need to develop a meditation practice where you gradually develop this practice of 2 or 3 sessions per day for 30 minutes or more. And this can take you 6 months, a year, even 2 years to build up to this type of frequency. What you're going to notice is that frequency is more important than duration. If it's a matter of 1 meditation for 30 minutes or 2 for 15, do the 2 for 15 and then gradually expand that, because that's what's going to really help you is the frequency. So you're going to need to build a regular, consistent daily meditation practice. And if you're building this up to 2 or 3 sessions per day for 30 minutes or more, you're going to see complete transformation of the mind gradually over time. And it's not about whether you miss a meditation today or not. That's not what's going to determine whether you get to enlightenment. It's that once you've missed your meditation today, what do you do next? So if you do 2 meditations a day in a month, that's basically 60 meditations. Well, if you get 52 or 53 or 54 meditations per month in, you're making your way to enlightenment. You're going to see drastic improvements in your mind. So no need to beat yourself up about missing a meditation here or there. Just be consistent with it. And where you see your mind's complacent, get right back in there and start meditating, right? So you would like to build up to that type of frequency. Then you'd also like to be developing what's called singleness of mind. This is where you're just doing one thing at a time. Your mind can only do one thing at a time, but you might have actually been taught that your mind can multitask. And this might be something that's going on in your work environment or even at home, but you're not actually multitasking. The idea of multitasking came about in the 1960s when computers came out, because a computer chip can multitask. It can do multiple things at one time, but a human mind actually can't. It can only do one thing at a time. So if you're talking on the phone, you're watching TV, and you're eating a sandwich, you're not actually doing all 3 things at one time. Your mind's actually rapidly cycling from thing to 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 thing. And if you're doing this all day long, then you probably find it very challenging to relax. You might get home and you feel stress and anxiety, and it's really hard to just decompress. It's kind of like a racehorse racing around a track, that if it races around the track all day, when it goes to the barn, it can't relax. It's all hyped up, right? And your mind is the same way. So if you allow your mind to rapidly cycle like this, it's going to produce all kinds of unwholesome results for you. You're going to have an overactive mind, but also if you're on that conversation with your mom and you're watching TV and you're eating a sandwich, you're not really paying attention to the conversation. So that means this conversation that could have otherwise been 15 or 20 minutes, it probably lasted 45 minutes or an hour. And you might not have been able to bring your full wisdom to bear in order to practice things like right speech. So you might have actually said things that you regret later. You might have even agreed to things on the phone call that you didn't remember, and now you got to go back and follow up and check in and be like, hey, I know I agreed to do something for you, but what was that again? Because your mind wasn't paying attention to the conversation, and you weren't really benefiting from the TV program, and you weren't really able to fully enjoy the sandwich either and actually eat it, right? So you might even have stomach pains that you need to lay around and kind of deal with your stomach. Whereas if you just do one thing at a time, you can hone your mind to be more and more focused and concentrated. So if you're in that business meeting and you're noticing that your mind's wandering and going somewhere else and daydreaming, cut that off and let it go and bring your mind back to the business meeting. Or if you're washing dishes and you're noticing that your mind's wandering, cut that off and let it go and bring it back to washing the dishes. More and more, when you practice singleness of mind, in meditation, you're focused on the breath, developing the concentration, but also in day-to-day life, you're focusing and practicing singleness of mind. More and more, your mind will just stay focused and concentrated all the time. The way that I explain this to you is if you had a piece of wood and you had a piece of steel, like a steel rod, and you grinded this steel rod back and forth, initially it's going to bounce around a lot because there's no groove there yet. But if you grind this steel rod back and forth long enough, you're going to get a deeper and deeper groove, and it's going to be harder and harder for this steel rod to bounce out. It'll still bounce out of that groove because it's not so deep yet, but you're going to notice it and you're going to bring it right back to that groove. And now you're going to get it going again. And if you do this long enough, where you keep this steel rod back and forth in this groove, eventually the groove is going to be so deep that the steel rod never pops out. And your mind is exactly the same way. This is the way your mind's going to work, that if you keep your mind in the present moment, using singleness of mind, that now more and more it'll just stay there all the time. But as you're first starting like this, it's going to bounce around. In your meditation, it's going to bounce around, and in your daily life. But wherever you see that occurring, you're seeing that and observing that with your mindfulness. Your right mindfulness is helping you to be able to see that, hey, the mind is not in the present moment. It is not practicing singleness of mind. I'm washing the dishes, but the mind is somewhere else. Or I'm in this business meeting, in the mind somewhere else. That's where your mindfulness comes in. Then you apply your right effort to cut that off and let it go and bring the mind back to the present moment. And now, more and more, as you stay there in the present moment, you're going to be developing this concentration where you can be focused and concentrated. And then with that, you'll be able to bring forth your wisdom. Because when your mind is calm, you're going to have mindfulness or awareness of mind. And then when you have mindfulness, you're going to have concentration or focus. And when you have concentration or focus, you can bring forth your wisdom, make wise decisions in your day-to-day life. It's going to produce wholesome results. But where you're lacking this, your mind is uncalm. It's shaken up. You're not going to have mindfulness. You're going to lack that awareness of mind. And you're not going to have focus and concentration, which means you're not going to be able to access your wisdom. And now you're making unwise decisions that are going to lead to unwholesome results. And if I can use your example, Ted, this is a great example, is that if your wife was, say, in a car accident and you allowed your mind to be shaken up because of your attachment to her, then you're not going to have that awareness of mind. You're not going to have the concentration. You're not going to be able to make wise decisions to help her. So this is why you would like to let go of those conditional pleasant feelings so that you can get to the point where the mind's calm all the time. And now you can have mindfulness and awareness of mind. You can have concentration. And now you can make wise decisions in any situation that is unfavorable so that you can bring this situation to a more favorable conclusion. So it's practicing singleness of mind that's going to help you to be able to do that, where you can be focused all the time. But just understand your mind's going to bounce around, but wherever you see that, you cut that off and let it go and bring the mind back to the present moment. And more, you're going to notice that the mind just stays there all the time. So I'm going to just summarize this for you so that you guys can understand what we talked about, and then I'll just turn it over to you guys for any questions that you have. What we've been talking about is right effort, where you're taking the initiative to eliminate unwholesome aspects of the mind and cultivate wholesome qualities in the mind. You're either preventing unwholesome qualities from arising, you're abandoning unwholesome qualities that are currently in the mind, you're developing and bringing into the mind wholesome qualities that are not there yet, and then you're cultivating and developing and helping to sustain in the mind, supporting and encouraging wholesome qualities to permeate in the mind and fill up the mind. This is right effort. You're taking the initiative to do this. So for you, Mayuli, like where you see your mind's complacent, that's an unwholesome quality. You need to apply effort to cut that off and let it go. Right? So then there's mindfulness. That's what's helping you apply the right effort, that you have this awareness of the mind. That's where you might hang out for a while, just developing awareness of the mind. But then ultimately you'd like to develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness, where you're aware of those bodily sensations, that early warning system, that you're aware of the feelings, that you're aware of the condition of the mind, and then the mental objects. And that's something you're going to need to work at and develop over time. And then you'd like to practice right concentration, which is practicing a meditation practice of 2 or 3 sessions per day, building up to 30 minutes or more. And then practicing singleness of mind, where you're focused and concentrated in day-to-day life until you start experiencing the jhanas. As you start experiencing these enhanced qualities of mind that we're going to talk about next week, now you'll see that you can kind of pivot and start focusing on the fetters themselves, that you're going to need to develop a breathing mindfulness meditation practice and loving kindness meditation practice to really hone the mind. So this is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, which is the mental discipline section of the Eightfold Path. And this rounds out our 3-part series on this particular path. And we're going to revisit this when we get to chapter 5, but I'm going to be teaching the entire path in one class. So this is an opportunity for you to really take your time and soak this in. You're not going to master this in 3 weeks, but you can get introduced to it, you can study it, you can get it and start learning it, investigating it, you can start integrating some of it into your life, and then you're going to tweak this like those 8 dials. You're going to be constantly tweaking the sound and trying to get a better and better quality sound out of the speakers. The same thing is true about the mind. You would like to tweak this more and more each and every day. And that's what's going to lead you to enlightenment, because you're going to fully extinguish all the unwholesome qualities that are in the mind, namely craving, desire, attachment. This is the complete perfect plan that leads exactly where the Buddha said it does. It leads to this enlightened mental state where the mind is peaceful and joyful, and it's a permanent mental state. So let me know what questions you guys have on this particular chapter. We can discuss any aspect of the path that you would like, particularly the mental discipline section. But if you have questions on other aspects of it, you're welcome to ask those questions by putting them into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
You said one time that the Buddha mentioned or did advise his students, if you are walking, you're walking. If you are eating, you are eating. It is about concentration. Sometimes maybe when I am walking to college, as I have like 100 craving there. So while I am walking, I am thinking about those craving, what I should do, what I shouldn't do, what I should put my mind in the situation or not, and those things. Or when I am eating, I do think also about the cravings and what I should or shouldn't do. Would that be singleness of mind, or when is the time to think about those things? What do you advise?
Yeah, early in practice, this is probably what you're experiencing, what you're describing. But more and more, you would like to start learning how to sit down and almost like look at the mind and have almost like a conversation with yourself, where you become reflective and you look at those things. Like you have your meditation practice, but now maybe every once a week, once every 2 or 3 weeks, or once or 2 or 3 times a week. So either once a week or 2 or 3 times a week, you would like to sit down and kind of look inward and start being reflective and thinking about those things. Now, if you're riding on a bus or something like that, that's a great time to do that. Or you're riding in the back of a taxi, because you're not having to do anything. So you could easily be reflective during those periods of time. But when you're walking, you would like to focus on that walking, because if you're so deep in thought, you could walk out in the middle of the street and whack, you're dead, right? So you're not interested in doing those kinds of things. When you're eating, it's wise to focus on the eating, but in some cases you might be talking, and that's where the body is chewing and the mind is maybe talking or listening to somebody talk. So the body can do one thing, and the mind can be doing something else. But the mind can only be in one place. And the body can actually do multiple things. Like I can rub the top of my head and rub my stomach at the same time, but the mind can focus on just this conversation. So more and more, you would like to just focus singleness of mind and know in those situations where, hey, I'm in the back of a taxi, I'm able to be reflective here and I can just think about this. But when you're walking down the street, that's not really the time to be wandering in thought, unless you're like in your neighborhood where there's not really any fast cars, you're safely on a sidewalk, you're just kind of maybe meandering in a park or around a lake or something like that, where you know that you're not going to meet with any disasters or calamity. Those are the kind of environments where you could potentially walk and kind of think about things, when you're doing that kind of walking where you know that the body's in a safe place and you're not going to make any unwise decisions.
So it is still like singleness of mind to think and walk, but I should see if it's dangerous for me or not. It is still singleness of mind.
Yeah, it's still singleness of mind, because when you're walking around a lake, for example, if it's like a paved trail, it's a walking trail, there's no cars, there's no danger, the body can be walking and the mind is focused on the reflection and the thinking. So that's possible, right? That's what you're doing when you're doing walking meditation, for example. The body is walking while the mind is doing the focus through the eyes. So you can do that like on a safe place like that. The mind is doing the thinking, the body's doing the walking. So the mind is practicing singleness of mind.
So singleness of mind is only about the mind, not about the body. Like I can maybe think and walk. They are two things, two actions, but it is singleness of mind because the mind is doing one thing.
Right, but that's why I'm explaining to you that based on the environment that you're in, if I was in New York City, I wouldn't be walking down the street and thinking at the same time. I'd be walking down the street and looking at the cars and making sure that when I cross the street that there's no cars coming. This would be an unwise time to be in deep thought. Because that's going to be very dangerous for you. So yes, the body can walk and the mind can think. These are the practice of singleness of mind, but you would like to only do that in a safe environment because you're going to need the capacity of your mind to walk through New York City and pay attention to the traffic. You're not going to be able to be deep in reflective thought and pay attention to the traffic. That's two aspects that the mind needs to do, and your mind can only do one thing at a time. So that's why I say if you're going to do thinking and walking, do it in a safe environment.
Okay, I also have a question about right speech. I tend to overthink the words or the sentences I am going to say or the one that I did say. For example, I don't know how to put that in a phrase, but when someone tells you something, you tend to say like, "Oh, really?" So if I were you and said, "Oh, really," I will overthink it like, will an enlightened being say, "Oh, really?" Am I like not trusting that person? Am I saying that he is lying or something? So I tend to do that. But then I realize it is not about the word choice. Like, I don't need to overthink the words or the sentences, but just to observe. Are they harmful? Are any harm going to get back to me? If not, then it's okay to say such a things. Would that be right, or what would you say?
Yeah, anytime you're speaking, you would like to reflect on the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. Is it the proper time? Is it true? Is it gentle? Is it beneficial? Is it with the mind of loving kindness? You've got to get away from the way that you typically approach this path, and you've done this many times where you're kind of looking for what are the criteria of exactly what an enlightened being would do and what an enlightened being wouldn't do. And it's almost like this decision tree. And you've got to get away from that. Like an enlightened being wouldn't say, "Oh, really?" That's like not true. You got to understand that that's like a permanent thing. That's not factoring in the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. It's not about a certain phrase or something like that. It's true. An enlightened being would never drink intoxicants or ingest any intoxicants. An enlightened being would never lie. We can say these kinds of things. But when it comes to a phrase like, "Oh, really?" an enlightened being would say that because it's not necessarily implying that someone's lying. It could just be, "Oh, really?" Right? It could be like someone might say, "Hey, I'm going to Vietnam for a trip." "Oh, really? What made you decide to do that?" Right? There's no harm in that. You haven't caused any harm. So it's not necessarily about the phrase itself. It's making sure that you practice the natural laws, which are encapsulated for speech in right speech to include the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. And an enlightened being isn't going to be causing any harm. But whether they say this phrase or that phrase, that's a personality choice. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. Becoming an enlightened being isn't like there's this template and every single enlightened being speaks exactly the same way. That's not the way enlightenment is at all.
The way the mind is now having aversion from speaking because I keep overthinking about the word choices and sentences I say. So I shouldn't be doing that and just look at it. Is it harmful? No. So no harm is going to back to me. So whatever it is, it's okay, right?
Yeah, what the Buddha teaches is that before you have any verbal action, bodily action, or mental action, while you're having those actions and after you've had those actions, you should reflect. Is it causing harm to others? Is it causing harm to me? Or is it causing harm to both? And if any of those situations are occurring, you should either refrain from doing that action, or you should stop doing that action, or you should never do that action ever again. So saying, "Oh, really?" that's not causing any harm to anybody whatsoever. So there's no harm in you saying that. You got to get away from that idea that there's certain phrases that an enlightened being would never say. An enlightened being would never use profanity, right? We know that. But these kinds of phrases, simple phrases like this, is all going to come down to your personality choice because there's no harm whatsoever. An enlightened being won't be causing harm, and that phrase isn't causing any harm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, it looks like Marcy has a question.
Thank you, Teacher David. I had some additional questions about the death meditation, but I'm not sure if maybe you'd like to take the other questions first and maybe sit with me afterwards.
Yeah, if you'd like to stick around after class, we can talk about it then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Mr. Leo. All right, I think Leo might not be there, so it looks like Ted or Kristen is up.
Hi, thank you, David. I have a question about whether I'm choosing to do something that is okay. So this is the situation. So I'm trying to work on being more generous, and so I've decided to do some volunteer work. And I've chosen to do this volunteer work at a ranch a horse ranch, and these horses are used to help children like with disabilities and helping them with like balance and eye-hand coordination and sort of communication and things like this. And I guess I was wondering, is this wise to do because it is working with animals? And these animals are owned by people and they're being used I think in a helpful way to sort of, help children and rehabilitate them. But is it unwise because they're animals, I guess is the question.
Sure. So if you were basing your livelihood off of this, which you aren't, if you were doing that, that means that, okay, you're, having to have these living beings in order to support your life. And this is going to cause difficulties in your life because now you're going to be regularly around these animals and you can get disease or injured and all kinds of problems from those decisions to sustain your life off of a business and living beings. So that's not the case here. So it doesn't fit with that. In terms of what you're doing is you're choosing to practice generosity, which is really helpful for your mind. But just understand the type of generosity that you practice, it's going to be of one particular quality or another. When you're practicing generosity towards an animal, this is generosity and it's helping your mind. And it's probably one of the lower qualities of generosity, but it's still what's potentially you're deciding to do, and that's what's needed, and that's definitely helpful. And you're also practicing generosity towards the human beings because these animals are actually being used to help the human beings as well. So with all of that in mind, you can understand that coming in contact with these beings, you still have the risk of being injured or getting diseases and stuff like that, and that might be something that you're accounting for and that you're looking at. So I wouldn't classify it as wise or unwise, but it is something that you would like to pay attention to because, as you know, if you go around a horse without awareness of mind and you're not making wise decisions, you can very easily end up in a hospital because these animals are quite strong. So that's sometimes where you kind of look at the risk involved and decide whether or not this is something that you would like to continue to do or not. And only you can make that decision. There is certain things that could happen, and I just explained some of those and you are aware of those. So that's what you're going to have to weigh and see, is this something that you would like to continue to do, or would you like to maybe apply your generosity in another environment where maybe there's not as many risks?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All generosity is helpful. All right. It looks like Leo still has his hand up. I don't know, sir.
I'm back here.
All right, good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just when I think about the path of right concentration, breathing mindfulness is the concentration meditation. But loving kindness also, right? It's also in that. Because in loving kindness meditation, there's also breathing, so this is the concentration. But the focus on the phrases is also a kind of training of concentration, right? Or just interest.
Yes, that's true. And also, as you're eliminating your anger, hatred, ill will, which loving kindness meditation does, that's going to bring more concentration and focus into your mind as well.
Okay. And focusing on the chanting is also a way of concentration, you could say, right?
Exactly.
Okay, good. Yeah, then about right speech, just a small question. Talking at the proper time. So if I'm discontent, or if the other person is discontent, it's not the proper talk. Does pleasant feelings also fix in that? For example, if the other person is really happy or is excited, is that not the proper time to talk with that person?
Yeah, you can think of it that way in some situations. If they're experiencing a lot of overwhelming happiness, their mind's grabbing on and they're craving. So as long as you keep exposing them to contact, whatever you're talking about or saying, it's going to keep allowing that discontentedness to reside in the mind. So oftentimes if I see somebody get really, really excited, I would just kind of step away from the conversation for a little bit, let their mind calm down. They might not even know what I'm doing because they may not even be practicing the teachings, but this is one of the most loving, kind, and compassionate things you can do is be observant of someone else's mind and decide when would be the wisest time to talk. Now, if certain people are just a little bit happy, you're not going to step away because you're not looking for perfect conditions to be able to talk, because sometimes they're going to be a bit happy. But if somebody's really excited, that's not the best time to be talking, because whatever you're talking, they're not really able to internalize it and understand it anyway. So it's kind of like a little bit of a waste of time.
Okay. And when they are really happy, or if I'm really happy or really excited, the discontentedness, you say, is waiting wide at the corner. Is it with these strong emotions? Is discontentedness is like unpleasant feelings coming right away, like right next, or is it sometimes a day later? I get really frustrated and annoyed.
That's the same question you asked earlier. The pleasant feelings are the pleasant feelings based in craving, and when these painful feelings come, it's going to be any length of time. When I say they're waiting right around the corner, that's just a saying to say that you are going to experience painful feelings. If you allow the mind to experience the painful ones, you're going to experience. I'm sorry. If you allow the mind to experience the pleasant feelings, you are going to experience the painful ones. And that's what we mean when we say it's waiting right around the corner. It's not really a reference to the amount of time. It's more a reference to just say you will experience them.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Because for me, it sometimes seems that if I'm kind of really happy and I got indulged in that a short time maybe, and sometimes, really close to that, I got, well, let's say at the beginning of a day, I'm really happy. But after a while, I get annoyed and I want quietness. I want to be at my own room. Is that the opposite side then from the morning?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, you're welcome.
That's all.
All right. I don't see any questions on Facebook or YouTube. So I'm going to end class here by thanking all of you guys for joining. I appreciate that you have attended class and interested to learn the teachings. And if you've been attending over the last 3 sessions, you now have the understanding of the Eightfold Path to a certain degree. You're going to need to revisit this multiple times. You can ask some of the students that are in the class today. They've been studying this multiple times. You're going to need to revisit it multiple times. If this was your first time understanding the Eightfold Path, great. But you're going to need to revisit it multiple times. And you're going to need to dial it in, and you're going to need to ask more and more questions to really dial it in closer and closer. So it's been wonderful to share these 3 classes with you to help you be able to see this overview of the path to enlightenment. Next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about the 4 stages of enlightenment in the 10 fetters, because that's what the Eightfold Path is guiding you towards, is to eliminate these 10 individual pollutions and start experiencing the 4 stages of enlightenment. So that's what we're going to be discussing next week. And then after that, we're going to start from chapter 1 in the book, and we're going to go chapter by chapter by chapter from that point forward, which is 2 weeks from now. So you might start deciding to read the preface and kind of chapter 1, kind of start leaning in that direction. That'll help you so that you'll get to the point where we're ultimately going to be starting chapter 1 2 weeks from now. And then this Wednesday, we're going to be in the fourth part of our 4-part series where I've been teaching breathing mindfulness meditation. And then another week and a half from now, we'll be starting a 4-part series on loving kindness meditation, because these are the 2 primary types of meditation that you're going to need in order to be able to transform the mind. So thank you all for joining for today's class. If you guys need any help whatsoever, you can ask questions in a live class. You can post on our Facebook group, you can send private messages, or you can schedule personal guidance through our website where you can actually schedule and we'll meet in Zoom one-on-one. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you for your interest to learn. And whatever you decide to do today, have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.